Get started this morning. Good morning and welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. It is 9 a.m. on Thursday, November 20th, 2025. We're here at the California Natural Resources Building in Sacramento, California. And my name is Julie Lee and I'm chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. In accordance with our Bagley-Keene requirements, we're going to conduct a roll call vote of our council members to establish a quorum. Emma, can you lead us in a roll call vote?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. I want to note that Councilmember Moranian is absent but will be joining us later. Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Hueso.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Lee.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Our next agenda item is our closed session, and we plan to return around 9:30 a.m. So we will see you back here at 9:30.
Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started again. We have returned from closed session. We have nothing to report out, and I'm going to turn it over to Jorge just to give a brief explanation.
Yes, just wanted to discuss that we met in closed session to discuss pending litigation pursuant to the government code, and I wanted to state the cases that we were discussing. The first is in the Court of Appeal, Third Appellate District, Tulare Lake Basin Water Storage District versus Department of Water Resources, case number C01878. And the second matter we discussed is in the Sacramento County Superior Court, and that's the County of Sacramento et al. Versus Delta Stewardship Council, and that's case number 25 WM 000030. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our next agenda item is public comment. This item is for the public to comment on any of the council's on any topic not on the council's agenda. Any comments on items on the agenda need to be taken during that item. Emma, can you tell us how the public can participate in today's meeting?
If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov as seen on the screen. Be sure to note a name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments for items not on today's agenda?
I want to note that the council received 2 public comment letters in between last council meeting and this council meeting. Those letters are available on the back table in the room and online. We do not have any requests for public comment in Sacramento. Councilmember Zingali and Councilmember Miller.
None in Eureka, thank you.
None in Phoenix. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next agenda item is the consent calendar. We have the adoption of the October 23rd, 2025 meeting summary. Before we vote, I want to ask if there's any public comments on the items on the consent calendar.
No public comment in Sacramento.
None in Eureka.
None in Phoenix.
Thank you. Since we have no public comments, I'll entertain a motion to approve these items.
Move approval. Second.
Right. Motion moved by Member Moranian and seconded by Member Burgess. Emma, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Burgess, aye. Councilmember Hueso.
Aye.
Hueso, aye. Councilmember Moranian.
Aye.
Moranian, aye. Councilmember Miller.
Aye.
Miller, aye. Councilmember Patterson.
Aye.
Patterson, aye. Councilmember Zingali.
Aye.
Zingali, aye. Chair Lee.
Aye.
Lee, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you. Our next agenda item is the chair's report. I wanted to talk for a few minutes about the State of the Estuary Conference that I went to at the end of October in Oakland. The bay itself got marks for being fairly stable, and that was attributed to an improvement in large-scale restoration projects and pollution regulations. The Delta was noted was a little more subsided than the Bay, And we have other complications due to the fact that we have a drinking water supply coming out of the Delta. So those were sort of like the big overarching, I think, theme of the conference of how things were doing. What was notable to me was the way that the conference combined art with a lot of the presentations that were given, and a real emphasis on communicating with communities in the way that they want to be communicated with, through art and storytelling and using plain language and other things that we've mentioned in this council, like not using a lot of acronyms and different things like that when we're in public. So I thought that that was really a nice theme and a great way to do it and to engage people. The other thing that was of great interest to me was some of the work going on in the Bay around a long-term planning for sea level rise. And I was just fascinated with some of the presentations from the planning folks from Sausalito, and they were working with Oakland on an expected 2 feet of sea level rise in the Bay and how they were going to be dealing with that over the long term and taking a real long-range approach with it. Really having to engage some aspects of social science to talk to people about that and what that's going to mean for them and the things that they need to do in the Bay, and makes me think about our Delta and long-range planning and things like that. So yeah, it definitely got my wheels turning. I really, really enjoyed that conference a lot. Does anyone else have anything they want to mention during the chair's report? Any updates from any other members? All right, nope, seeing none. I'll ask if there's any public comment on this item.
No public comment in Sacramento.
No, Eureka.
None in Phoenix.
All right, thank you. Next, I'll turn it over to Executive Officer Jessica Pearson for the Executive Officer's report.
Good morning. Thank you. Welcome to a slightly early November meeting. And as a reminder, next month's meeting will also take place a week earlier on December 18th, and that's to accommodate a busy season of travel, holidays, and more. I'm excited to announce that we have a new episode of the Delta Dispatch podcast that's just been released. This is hosted by former California Sea Grant State Fellow Dane Wicker. It features Colin Purdy, who is an environmental program manager for California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Megan Quinn, a program director for American Rivers, and they explore science, policy, and partnerships behind improving fish passage, and that includes discussion of the recent Klamath Dam removals. So please check that out. The Delta Dispatch series episodes tie their topics to Delta Plan performance measures. And there have been 7 episodes. They're all linked on our website. You can find them under the Delta Plan tab on the performance measures page, or just by Googling Delta Dispatch podcast. And so some of the previous topics included balancing the co-equal goals, Delta levees, harmful algal blooms, subsidence, and more. And if you haven't listened to them, I highly recommend them. They're short listens, and I think Dane does a great job of breaking down complex topics in an entertaining way. No new covered actions have been filed since our last council meeting. However, we are in receipt of 10 appeals that were filed prior to the November 17th deadline of the Department of Water Resources Delta Conveyance Project Certification of Consistency. So the hearing for those appeals will be held within 60 days of that November 17th date. The council will issue a notice of hearing setting the exact dates as well as the time and place early next week. Another reminder that the council has a new Delta Conveyance Project website under the Covered Actions tab on the council website. This provides the public access to certification of consistency and appeal documents. Information on that website also includes a box link for the entire record for the certification. And so for questions on anything that I just mentioned, the public can contact engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. I'm now going to turn it over briefly to our Chief Counsel, Jorge Aguilar, for information on ex parte restrictions associated with the appeals.
Council members, the council's regulations require that I remind the council of the ex parte communication restriction at this meeting. The ex parte communication restriction is a requirement of California's Administrative Procedure Act and also the council's appeals procedures, which are expressed in regulation. It prohibits any communication, direct or indirect, regarding any issue in the proceeding to the council or council members from any employee or representative of an agency that is a party or from an interested party outside the agency without notice and opportunity for all parties to participate in the communication. Now, we recently received 10 appeals for the certification of consistency of the Delta Conveyance Project. So this ex parte restriction went into effect the moment the appeals came in. What that means here is that council members and council staff cannot and should not communicate about or discuss the consistency of the Delta Conveyance Project or the council's appeals proceeding with any person outside the council. The only exception is communication regarding the administrative or procedural status of the proceedings, and the manner to do that is set forth in the council's notice of appeals. There's an email address for the parties to communicate with the council. I strongly recommend that if you find yourself anywhere that the Delta Conveyance Project and the council's current appeals proceedings become a topic of conversation, that you please excuse yourself from the meeting immediately by explaining you're under an ex parte communication prohibition and cannot discuss or hear any extra record information about the project. If you receive a request from someone other than a council employee to discuss the Delta Conveyance Project, please decline that request and make Executive Officer Jessica Pearson and myself aware of that request so that we can handle it appropriately. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the ex parte communication restriction at this time.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'm going to move on to the legislative update, and I'll invite up Audrey Cho.
Good morning, council members. The legislature is currently on interim recess until January 5th. As a quick note, on November 17th, Senator Monique Limon took oath as the new pro tem of the state Senate, taking the place of Senator Mike McGuire. Senator Limon's formal swearing-in ceremony is in January. So I'll begin by covering a few bills that were vetoed by the governor that may be of interest, starting with Assembly Bill 93 by Assemblymember Pappen. This would have mandated that data center operators disclose estimates of expected water use and report out yearly on actual water use. The veto message stated hesitation to impose restrictions on this sector without further understanding impacts to businesses and consumers. We also have Assembly Bill 524 by Assemblymember Wilson, which would have created the Farmland Access and Conservation for Thriving Communities program within the Department of Conservation. This would have provided financial and technical assistance grants to support acquisition of agricultural land leases for socially disadvantaged farmers. The veto message pointed to the budget difficulties of creating a new unfunded program. Lastly, Senate Bill 224 by Senator Hurtado would have required the Department of Water Resources to update water supply and snowmelt forecasting models to further address the effects of climate change and supply documentation to this effect. The veto message cited satisfaction with the department's progress in updating rain and snowfall modeling procedures to properly account for climate change. On October 29th, Executive Officer Jessica Pearson was invited to present to the legislature's semi-annual Water Policy Academy, which engages new or interested legislative staff on California's unique water landscape. Jessica's presentation, The Delta and Why You Should Care, oriented staff to the Delta's location, how it has changed over time, and the role of the council in fulfilling its legislatively mandated functions to protect the co-equal goals for the Delta. We had 11 attendees from member offices representing much of California, including the Delta, the North Coast, Central Valley, Bay Area, and Southern California. Also in attendance were committee consultants from the Senate Committee on Agriculture, the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee, and the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee. Last month, Representative Josh Harder of Congressional District 9 reported a $2.6 million award for cleanup of abandoned or submerged vessels and vehicles in the Delta. This funding came from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's Marine Debris Program and was awarded to the California Department of Parks and Recreation. State actors will work with local sheriff's departments and construction and salvage companies on the debris removal. Funds will also support boater education and outreach and deterrence devices at 15 different hotspots for illegal dumping, and the expected date of completion for this project is September of 2029. Election Day was just a few weeks ago. Californians voted during a statewide special election on whether to pass Proposition 50, a ballot measure to adopt new congressional maps that would create up to 5 new Democratic-leaning districts. Under these proposed maps, U.S. House districts with the largest total percentage of their district within the legal Delta and Sassoon Marsh are Congressional District 9, including Contra Costa, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus counties, currently represented by Josh Harder, and Congressional District 8, including Contra Costa and Solano counties, currently represented by John Garamendi. And then lastly, on November 12th, a 43-day federal shutdown concluded. This occurred after Congress advanced a continuing resolution to fund multiple agencies and programs for the full fiscal year and all others until January 30th, 2026. This package includes 3 mini-bus bills of full-year funding for the Department of Agriculture, Department of Veteran Affairs, and military construction projects and the operations of Congress. Other agencies are temporarily funded through the end of January, and there are 9 appropriations bills left up for decision-making, which make up 90% of discretionary funding. Of particular interest to us are Commerce, Justice, Science, Interior Environment, and Energy and Water bills. Combined, these cover appropriations for the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, the Department of Interior, including Fish and Wildlife and the Geological Survey, the Army Corps, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, and more. Upcoming funding decisions will be highly important given implications for programs we work with both directly and indirectly. We can expect movement on these spending bills in the coming weeks and months. Amid these discussions, federal agencies at the center of California water issues have experienced staff cuts and resignations and reductions, as well as drops in staffing levels due to buyouts. The Interior Department, which includes the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife, and the Geological Survey, have experienced a 16% reduction in staff. And then the Department of Commerce, which includes the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, has experienced a 7% reduction in staff. Also, during the shutdown, more than 4,000 employees were given layoff notices across various departments, including the Department of Conservation and the Department of Energy. With the deal to reopen the government, these employees were reinstated to their posts. Lastly, I know there was a lot of interest last month regarding flood insurance in the Delta, potential impacts of the National Flood Insurance Program. A memo on this topic will be headed your way to hopefully provide further context and answer your questions. And with that, I'm happy to cover or answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I'm going to point you to our packet where we include an outreach highlights report as well as our active projects list. Of course, anytime, any questions on those, just let me know. And then ahead for today on the agenda, next we're going to hear from our Delta lead scientist. Welcome back, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers. And then council staff will highlight social science integration in our work and key progress over the last 5 years on that topic. We're also going to introduce you to Dr. Tara Pazzi, the council's newest social science extension specialist. And then in closing, the council science program is going to present preliminary results from our newly launched research impact assessment, which is an effort to track and understand the science and management impact of council-funded research. And that concludes my executive officer's report. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Does any members have any questions for Jessica? Nope, seeing none. Emma, are there any public comments on the executive officer's report?
There are no public comments in Sacramento.
No public comments in Eureka.
None in Phoenix.
Thank you. All right, agenda item 8 is our lead scientist report. Welcome back. Nice to see you here. Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers.
It was a good one. I watched it. You didn't miss me. It was good. But yeah, it's good to be back, and I'm loving that it's wet in Sacramento right now. And it's nice to see you all before the holidays. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, so it's really great. We can go to the next slide. And today we're going to focus on one of our co-equal goals, restoring Delta ecosystems, and specifically tidal marshes and their associated food webs. And food webs are basically interconnected food chains. Plants are eaten by animals, and they live in a certain area, and they consume each other, and there's all kinds of interactions. And that's what we're focusing on here. And when we reintroduce tidal waters to the land, like we just did last September at Lookout Slough, this is really one of the ecosystem functions we're trying to get back. And so that's in addition to many other benefits that we've already talked about in council. So reducing when you reconnect, you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It prevents flooding by slowing water flows. It can redirect salinity intrusion from the ocean. It can promote recreation, of course, and enhance habitat for native and threatened species. So this high-profile paper is from someone you might remember, Megan Pagliaro. She's a UC Berkeley PhD student, and she's a recent Delta Science Fellow. And she did this alongside her community mentors at US Geological Survey. And what they're seeking to understand here is to what extent the restoration of tidal marshes in the Delta can get back ecosystem function. And this is important because we've lost here in the Delta about 95% of our tidal wetlands. And so can we get back that function with such a great loss? Next slide, please. And so here's what that loss looks like. This is a useful map comparison that's made by the San Francisco Estuarine Institute. And it was made in 2012. People use this one a lot. It gives a sense of how highly impacted the Delta is since the 1800s. So what you're looking at on the left, the Delta used to be a huge, extensive freshwater wetland connected to the rivers and tides with branched and meandering channels, very complex. But then today, the wet is cut off from the land. So if you're out in the Delta, you're either in the water standing on a boat, or you're on the land, standing on the land, and there's a big levee wall between you. And so that land also that you're standing on is almost the majority of it's in agricultural production, and that's what you're seeing on the right. And so why does this matter to food webs? Well, these ecosystems developed over at least 7,000 years. All of the wetland food that was being produced on those lands was being flushed out to the estuary as algae and detritus. And again, the word detritus, we've used so many words for this, but particulate organic carbon, it's the leaves you see laying on the streets around here, but basically just dead, decaying plant material. Turns out to be really important in the system. And so the impact of that loss, where we basically shifted the system that food was being channeled to fish to now we have a system where food is channeled to humans. It's really well documented by Dr. Jim Klern in a 2021 paper. It's an epic paper that people cite a lot. But as we have just lost Jim earlier this month, I feel like it's important to call out his contributions. He was a former member of the Delta Independent Science Board and an icon of estuarine science here and then around the world. And his long-term data here collected with the USGS really tells a story about this evolving Delta. All right, next slide, please. And we do have many wetland restorations underway. Compared to the rest of the country, we are growing wetlands. It's actually pretty incredible. 60 to 80,000 acres are called for in the Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment, and that's about 10% of the overall Delta acreage that's being asked for. And specifically 52,000 acres of tidal wetland are targeted amongst things like floodplains and seasonal wetlands and such. So here in yellow are 3 restoration sites in the brackish region of the Delta that Megan and her colleagues chose to compare with each other, and then also to contrast with their neighboring historic natural marshes, which they call reference sites. And you're seeing them here in orange. So some of these you might recall is the Department of Water Resources Tule Red project in Grizzly Bay. And that was reconnected to tidal flows in 2019. And then Wheeler Island was reconnected in 2008. And then Sherman Lake was really an accidental breach in the late 1800s. And all of this is within this one sort of 20-mile corridor from Oakley to Suisun Bay. So based on over 1,000 samples of plants, algae, and fish that they collected in 2 different water years, the wet year of 2020 and the dry year of 2021, they found some interesting patterns. So next slide, please. And here's a simple version of this. The first thing to point out here is that we compared these older millennial wetlands on the left to the younger restoring sites on the right. When we look at them, we see a more complex food web in the older sites, which basically means more interactions among.
What's younger? Just kind of like, is that like 2 years old? Is that 12 years old?
I think 12 years old. 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 You mean the younger wetlands?
Yeah, the younger.
Yeah, they're all three of them. On the right, the restoring ones,
Uh-huh.
2019 restored,
So really new.
2008 restored, and then actually one was restored in 1870s.
Oh, okay.
So it's old, it's 100 years
old,
old,
yeah.
but it actually is more similar to the other restoring
Wow.
site. I know, it's interesting.
Ah,
But there's a lot of details there about
right. Okay.
elevation
I
and
just was
stuff.
trying to understand what,
Yeah.
restored versus.
Oh, I appreciate the
Okay.
question. Yeah. So the ones on the left are thousands of years old. They're like they've been here ever since. And the ones on the right are somehow a breach caused them. And then again on the right, so the point of the one on the left is it's good to be redundant. Because the reason we care about this is that it gives resilience to those communities. So there's more choices for how you get your energy. And you could kind of think about DMDU, this decision making under deep uncertainty. More choices and pathways, it really gives more resilience to a food web. On the right, the simpler food web actually still has similar components. So it has algae and detritus at the bottom, and then zooplankton, the little bugs in the water that are eating that, and it has the same species of fish. And that's actually great news. The community is the same, but what's different is it's a shorter food web there. It's implying that it's basically less productive and less stable. So the choices are less robust. There's not a lot of exchange going on between the species. Another thing to point out here is that you're looking at threadfin shad in the center there, the kind of golden one. That's a transient one. It competes with silver sides, Mississippi silver sides on the left there, and it's being eaten by the uber predator here, the striped bass, which is an introduced species. And so we see all these species there, but all of these fish, if you look at where they're getting their food, it's primarily from detritus. So it's primarily from decaying plant matter. And that's especially true in the historic marshes, and it's especially true for the native and the resident fish, as compared to the non-native and the transient ones that are coming in and out. So this is really points
Like the striped bass.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But if they're eating in that food, there's more detritus in that striped bass on the left than there is the striped bass on the right, which actually got pulled out because we were trying to make it more simple to make the case. This is very hard to illustrate with a graphic, but yeah, there's less arrows. And I think that's really the most important thing here too, that we're focusing on the arrows, not necessarily just the number of the fish and the number of the algae and so on. It's the interactions. And it really points again towards this slow recovery and the dominant role of decaying plant matter as an energy source in the tidal marshes here. So next slide, please. So the question, where does that lead us? What are the management implications? I think the first thing we have to recognize is that restoring tidal marsh acres does not necessarily mean restoring a healthy ecosystem. It's not about the number of acres, despite the fact that we focus solely on the number of acres of restored wetland to tidal flow. That's the performance metric that was reported in that state of the estuary report, or state of our estuary that Julie brought up. It's what we use in our performance measures. But the truth is that there's important ecological dynamics like robust and diverse feeding opportunities that are not showing up in those data just on acres. And so to actually restore resilient fish communities, we need to do a couple of things. One is design restoration projects strategically to enhance food webs. And that means getting the right plants in the right place with the right hydrology to produce and export that food to the food web. And this is essential, and you've heard it over and over on USGS boat tours, so I just have to say it again, getting the hydrology right is really important. We also need long-term monitoring that's focused on food webs themselves so we can consistently track and learn recovery and responses to stressors, because there's a lot of stressors. There's sea level rise, drought, species invasions, and then of course declines and loss of some of our key community members. And then finally, this kind of work is rare because again, it's focusing on the arrows, not on the number of fish and the concentration of algae. But it's actually possible with the new approaches like stable isotopes, which let you chemically track how food is moving through the system. And so there's a lot of changes going on. And you've heard this from Dr. Bob Nyman when he presented on food webs. We need to understand how the metabolism of the system is working, who's moving, how's the energy moving through. And this is a team effort. This is a team sport here because we have to share and leverage very limited amounts of data, like this huge stable isotope data set that came out of this. And so it's one reason that in this collaboratory that we launched this summer, some projects, we chose tidal wetland food web restoration as one of our focal areas. And so, yeah, you'll hear more about that soon, but I can take any questions on this topic.
So I used to go spend time in creeks doing benthic macroinvertebrate sampling, which is the bugs. So that was the first thing that kind of stood out to me, the zeoplankton. How do you say it?
Just zooplankton.
Zooplankton. There's a lot of different critters in the more established marsh. Has that led to, when determining where to do restoration, is there like sampling to see if there's already kind of more of established in that area for that kind of thing to help kind of pump up that ecosystem? Or is that just a result of the decomposition and kind of the established?
I will say that there's definitely monitoring for zooplankton. And so Department of Water Resources, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and others, they actually monitor. There's a new technique I just saw to use cameras in the water and just take lots of pictures and then identify, whether it's a cladoceran or what have you, Daphne, or whatever it is in the water. But I don't know that the choice of where restorations are happening, prioritization is happening based on where those communities are. I think they're considered mobile, and then the water is moving them back and forth. And so the hope is that if you, like Lookout Slough, you open it up and you hope that the zooplankton show up. And it is actually being actively monitored at Lookout Slough.
And then the only other thing I would say is, just because, I worked on a lot of restoration stuff. And so the other part of it is, how threatened are these specific areas that you're looking to restore to sea level rise, to the impacts of hydrology, salinity, saltwater intrusion and all of that. So, but thank you. This was really interesting.
I have one. One is from the previous page 3, when there's the comparison of delta.
Oh yeah.
Overall. So we should just assume that this is due to evaporation, this drought, global. I mean, I just don't want to make assumptions. I want to hear from you of why the change that we see in terms of.
Well, that's a human decision. So we, the state of California, through, I'm sure this is described much more eloquently in the historical documents like the TEJ paper, but we chose to put barriers to turn that wetlands into farmland because the soil is so good, and there were a lot of hungry people to feed, so that's why we put all those levees up, and that's why we've lost the wetlands.
There were actually federal land incentives
The Swamp Act
to dam those lands and drain them for agricultural purposes.
Then if we don't do that, it still would change due to other elements that we're dealing with.
I'm sure there would have been probably houses built on a lot of that land, if not for, and there have been houses on some of the land. So yeah, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I'm always thinking that naturally what would have happened if we didn't do a certain, choose a certain kind of infrastructure somewhere.
Well, it was a seasonally inundated swamp, so as long when people move nearby, then they're not going to like some of the impacts of living by a swamp. So I think eventually some change was inevitable as people came for the gold rush and stayed after the gold rush in California. But it's hard to say because this is the way it ended up being developed, and now these are the policy consequences that we're all trying to manage for, is that separation of the land from the water that severs the food web.
Last night on PBS, there was a program on all the environmental hazards that the gold rush did to California in terms of the fauna and, you know, flora and everything else. So that's why I'm asking. I was thinking about all that. Great, thanks.
Well, and
That's
all
totally
over
relevant.
all over the country, when they passed the Swamp Act, the federal government, they didn't see the value in these type of wetlands, correct? And so they just wanted people to go fill them in so that they could farm them back when the country was much more agriculturally based. And so there was incentives, usually just for only for white men, that they could get this land almost for free if they filled it in. And so that's kind of how some of that came about too.
Thank you.
And the science wasn't there. We didn't know what we're doing. I
Science
mean,
was not there.
so much that we're doing right now is making up for things we did that we didn't realize would be so harmful. And that's why what we're doing when we're doing restoration work, it's not that to restore to when, right? Whoops, excuse me. And so at the time, people didn't know that by doing this, it was going to affect that. And so today we have that science. That's why science is so important in this whole discussion, is that we can say, okay, what can we do to make it better? And we're still learning. That's why it's all adaptive management, and that's why expanding our scientific understanding of all the elements, whether it's the biological or the social or the whatever, that's why this discussion's so important.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Just to highlight the Swamp Act, we've actually lost more wetlands here than most other states. So and then most of that loss really did happen in like the early 1900s. And so most states are maybe in the 50% loss. In California, we're in the 80% of all wetlands. There's actually more rice fields in California. I'm talking about wetlands than there is natural wetlands. So just so you know, I mean, we really have lost a lot of wetlands here. And it's particularly obvious right here in the Delta because it used to be a wetland, right? Anyway, and things are changing right now with the Clean Water Act. So I'm just saying, you know, it comes back again. We have a lot of changes going on with wetlands. Okay. We can move on then. Thank you to some highlights of the month. So yeah, thank you here. So the federal government was shut down for 6 weeks, but not the Delta Science Program. Here's 3 examples of things that were going on in October and November. The 2-day Adaptive Management Forum, I hear, was just, you know, extremely popular. It was in mid-October, about 160 people to the proverbial table online and in the room. There were 25 plus presentations and panel discussions. It's recorded, and I have watched the YouTube recording. It's a targeted opportunity to actually hear some lessons learned in decision making while also acknowledging uncertainty. I could not be there, but I highly recommend again that there's some frank and useful discussions that were fostered by the organizers. And particularly, I want to call out Dr. Stephen Elser, who really led that effort. 40 people then went on the day 2 site visit to Lookout Slough, the newly restored 3,000 plus acre site, and it is really exciting to see it. They shared how did we get here, so the acquisition, the design, the implementation, and then what's coming next with ecological monitoring. And again, they are focusing on food webs there, which is lovely. The benefits of collaboration were highlighted, and the next meeting is in 2027. This is an every 2 years meeting. The next one is the 2025 State of the Estuary meeting that Chair Lee highlighted. It was over 2 days in Oakland, and we were sponsors. I hear that our Stewardship Council table was very well attended. And I want to call out too that was organized by the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and they used as an opportunity to release this report card that Chair Lee mentioned, and it's something that we contributed to, and I think it's something worth looking at. It's beautiful in this display online, and it's an update from 2019, so it's got a lot of new information in it. There were over 700 participants, and there was art exhibitions and a lot of interactive exhibits with tribal and community-based organizations. We also had two panel discussions. One was on extreme event responses and adaptive, and another was on adaptive planning and social science integration. We had 7 posters on key initiatives that we've been performing here. That includes, for example, the research impact assessment that you're going to hear from Dr. Ash Zebedick next, and some other key posters were on the science action agenda, our draft science plan, which just got released yesterday, the Delta Science Tracker, particularly how to follow some carbon projects through that, a first glimpse into some of the products from the collaboratory, a performance measures update, and also updates on the Independent Science Board's food web review. And then lastly, I just want to call out that this is kind of a special time for invasive species to have a focus. The North American Invasive Species Management Association had its annual meeting. It's State Line, Nevada in early November, and our own Dr. Elizabeth Brisati presented a poster there on early detection and rapid response in partnership with the Delta Conservancy. So that's a topic that you heard about from Dr. Christine Whitcraft in July's council meeting, and a topic that you will hear more about in 2 weeks. So putting this on your radar, the Delta Invasive Species Symposium is here in this building. It's also online in the first week of December on a Thursday, December 4th. And it is, again, every 2 years put on by the Delta Interagency Invasive Species Coordination Team. This year's theme is modeling and managing invasive species for tomorrow's Delta. And sessions that might be interesting to you are management paradigms, invasive mussels in the Delta, and new tools for new conditions. And then there's a bunch of lightning talks. Elizabeth Brisati is deeply involved with that as well. Independent Science Board members will be present, and I'll be giving a small opening presentation. And again, it's promoting collaboration in invasive species management because it's so desperately needed to make any progress on containment and or response to invasive species. So that's what's coming up. And we can go on to.
Just want to, sorry to interrupt, but I did want to highlight for the Delta Science Plan draft that's now out for public review and public comment. We're accepting public comment until January 20th. And you can submit those comments via email at collaborativescience@deltacouncil.ca.gov. There's also an online survey on our website. So we encourage people to please review that and provide comments. And then also the Delta Independent Science Board is going to be providing their input as well. So sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to make sure we added that in there.
Really important. Yeah, I was thrilled to see it released yesterday. I didn't know that was coming. So then let's, talk about this. I want to just give a shout out to Henry DeBay for covering for me in October with this. He did such a good job. And he highlighted the fairly average conditions of last water year. Again, it was a really average year, unevenly distributed rainfall in time and space. But of course, this is California, and that's actually not that notable. But here we are, we're in month 2 of our new water year 2026, and November's rainfall is already 6-fold higher than what it was in October. So these numbers were like, instead of 10 inches, it was 1.7 inches in October. So we got a big dump. I think y'all probably know that. And it's also, if you just look at those numbers, it's 68 to 116% higher. So twofold what you would expect in November anyway. And then I also just looked at the south, like Tulare Basin, just to see, and they were 2-fold higher too. So it's just wet. It's good. It's a good November so far. Again, these recent storms picking up in the north and the south, and then the people said that under La Nina conditions, we might have a dry south. Well, it's just not starting that way right now. So the reservoirs are sort of holding at their 20-year average. No real story there. Growing a little bit from October, and then the flows on the Sacramento and San Joaquin and exports at the pumps are very similar to the past 20-year average. The salinity is pretty similar to the past averages. No real stories here. But I do want to point out some of the temperature, because if you might remember that we had a warm spell in November, and if you look, you'll see that it's actually a little bit warmer than historically for November at Collinsville, the confluence of the Sacramento and San Joaquin, and then at the Clifton Court Forebay where we do exports. So, and we don't have snowpack reported yet on the CDEC site where we pull it. So you're going to hear about it in December, because obviously they're opening some ski resorts. So there's definitely snow, and we can talk about that in December. So we won't talk about snowpack, but we can talk about harmful algal blooms. Another fun topic. So we can go to the next slide, please. We do have our special report for the year on harmful algal blooms for the year. What did we see? Nick Rowlands has gotten into the original data, and I don't know if Nick's in the room. There he is. Oh, wonderful. And he's showing us here in these slides all of the HABs that have been reported to the State Water Board, and they're available on the Open Data Portal. And I want to highlight that there's a lot of caveats in this data. So these are human reported. This may not be exhaustive to all reported locations. You're looking here at 5 years, the last 5 years. And you'll also notice that they're mostly in smaller channels. And there's some consistency in reporting in Stockton, Discovery Bay, Bethel Island, and then also Frank's Tract, which is a little bit of a bigger area. And if we just step through the last 5 years of data, we can go to the next slide, 2021, which is a dry year, and 2022. Next slide, please. Another dry year. And then 2023 are one of our epic wet years, of course. And then to 2024 was sort of average, but it was a hot year. And then now to here 2025, you're going to see a couple of things. You'll see that some of the same locations keep getting hits. And then you can also see that reports really fell off in the last couple of years. This year in particular has 16 reports, whereas in 2022, that dry year, there were 67 reports. And so you can see that there's a lot of variability between the years, and it's not confirmed data. So it's really argues for a better method for tracking HABs and their impacts. And it's very difficult to predict HAB presence, duration, intensity, because the water conditions that they respond to are varied, including lagged effects of one variable on another. So there's just a lot of pieces that go into this understanding. It's complicated, but again, it makes a fruitful topic for a collaboratory approach. So it's one of the pilot projects we launched this summer as well. That project profile is exploring many approaches and perspectives, and we hope that it can make some progress on HAB triggers in the next few years. And if you're wondering about just current HAB status, because actually, as Nick has said, October is kind of a bloomy time, sometimes even November. If you go to the State Water Board live map, you can look at this, and there are no blooms right now, just so you know. But that in the Delta, in the estuary, I should say. And then another issue to look at is HAB intensity, and that's the next slide. And this is the remotely sensed products that are available. We can do this with remote sensing because there's a color in the water that we can use. It's called the cyano index, and it's basically this is for cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms, often called blue-green algae. Right now, to get that color, that spectral color, you need to use a satellite that has 300 meters on a side, the size of a pixel. So it's not really good for small channels. It doesn't work, but it works in big areas like Clifton Court, Forebay, and then also, which is you're seeing here in the picture, and you're also seeing it on the bottom of the graphic. The second chart, and then the one on top is you can't read it, but this is Frank's Tract at the top there. And so you can see another thing here is that this is a way that you can track it. It doesn't tell you anything about how toxic it is, but it tells you whether the color's there and whether it's present or not. And we report these data in our performance metrics from the performance measurements team. And to be reported as a bloom, you have to be above the 7-day index of the cyano index of the value is 15.8. And so to be reported, it's actually very rare. You'll see that it's only a couple of spikes get in there and actually get called an actual bloom. And there's an interesting story down below. It's actually tenfold higher in the Clifton Court Forebay site down at the bottom graph. And what you'll see is that there's a really large spike in that cyano index just in this upper part of the Clifton Court Forebay. And because the pumps are in the south of there. So this is like kind of this backwater area. And it happens to have coincided with a moment in July when we were not exporting the Central Valley Project pumps. They were not operating. SWP was, but CVP was not. So it's just an interesting data point. And I'm showing this only so you can see how spiky this data is and how difficult it is to report things that might matter to you in terms of impact. But again, toxicity being the biggest concern, there's some interesting updates that are coming this year with implementing the cyanobacterial harmful algal bloom CHAB monitoring strategy that we released last year, you might remember. And there's presentations coming up at the Independent Science Board meeting in early December that you might be interested from DWR, and then also some highlighting some work from the collaboratory progress on HABs. So that's what we have for the year in HABs and by the numbers, so I can take any questions on those.
Anyone have questions? Yes,
I
Anne?
had one question. Could you speak to whether there's, what additional sort of technological options there are to improve monitoring? Because it seems like it's, the data is not great right now and the satellites are not great. Are there other things that are in the works to improve monitoring?
Yeah, the monitoring, right now there's people on the ground that obviously do sampling. There's sensors at fixed stations that can give you a blue-green algae value. The question of whether you trust them or not whether they're consistent, they have to be cleaned a lot. That's one part of it. People do targeted monitoring, targeted visits to hotspot sites to validate observations that are seen on remotely sensed data. But there isn't one agency that has just taken this head on and is really documenting not just presence, but also toxicity, the actual presence of the toxins that are of concern. There's interest in it, of course, and there's people doing it. It's just that it's not coordinated, which is why we ended up releasing this strategy last year, and it's being implemented right now by DWR in particular, with partners in the State Water Board and USGS and so on. So it's being done, but it takes somebody out there collecting water right now.
Oh yeah, Diane.
So who pays for those satellites? Is that a federally funded thing?
Yeah, this one is actually Sentinel that they're using, so that's European
Okay.
Space Agency.
So is that funding secure?
I think so, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah, I remember when we did DPIC, we really leaned in on the HABs topic, and I thought it was interesting to see all the state agencies that were really interested in learning more. The spikes seem to also, like it says here on the there's no page numbers on the 2025 report, talking about temperature and flow rates. That's when the water temperature gets warmer, the outdoor temperature is warm, the flow rates are low. Like you said, there wasn't a lot of water flowing at that time. And so you were saying that you can talk about the larger water bodies, but there's not a lot of information on, say, the smaller channels. And I think there's a lot of HABs in those smaller channels. Am I correct?
You are correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because if you look at all those little red dots, most of them are in the district that I represent as a county supervisor. And so I work really hard to help people understand because they're accessing the water. So this isn't just an issue for related to the science of, just identifying that it's actually impacts people that depend on fishing for food. It affects people that access the water for recreation or all of those things. We often hear about dogs getting poisoned from getting into the water. So it's a issue that really does impact, and I'm not sure if it's conversations with you or other folks, but there's even some speculation that the presence of harmful algae blooms near communities can have possibly health impacts, like affecting their lungs and that kind of thing. Is that a conversation you and I have had, or?
It's come up that aerosolization has come up a couple different times about what if you access this water and spray it, what happens.
Right.
And there's a degradation process that happens. It's not, one to one. It doesn't last forever. It doesn't grow,
Right.
build up in sediments. But yes, that's still a hot topic of what the actual exposure is. If you're not drinking it, but you're just breathing aerosols,
Right.
it's still a hot topic.
And so these red dots are reported from our monitoring or from other people, and what are those circumstances? Is that like a hotline or online?
Yeah, it's online, but do you remember how many?
It's a mix of the public and monitoring agencies, and it's a website.
So we need to have you in the microphone so that when people are listening to these very important things.
And just a friendly reminder that if you're not speaking, please make sure your microphone is deactivated. Thank you.
Good morning, council. I'm Nick Rowlands, environmental scientist at the Delta Stewardship Council. I was the person that put together the HABS report with Lisa Marie. And the reports are from a mixture of the public and agencies that are monitoring HABs across the Delta. And I think it's basically a web form that they submit, and then that is kind of collated by the state water board, and then they send people out to investigate whether there is anything there that needs further testing and mitigation.
I'm working really hard to raise awareness before these things happen so that they're not getting. I had a friend whose grandson went swimming and got sick in one of these in Discovery Bay. So I want to help people be able to recognize and understand, what to do before they get into the water, before they go fishing, before that and all that. So I'm just highlighting the importance of awareness and the monitoring and all of that. And, also maybe helping people know what to look for and how to report it.
So, Nick, did you say that website was the State Water Board's website, correct? Where people can go to report a HAB?
Correct, yes. I don't know the URL off the top of my head,
That's
but yeah, and it's linked like Lisa Marie mentioned, they have a map, like a live updated map that shows the location of the reported blooms and their status, and then that has a link to where you can actually report a bloom yourself.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It's mywaterquality.ca.gov. And there's a HABS reporting form on that website.
Good job, Jessica. All right. Thank you. Any other questions for Lisa Marie?
Let me just say that before you go swimming, there is that live, you can see if it's anybody's reported HAB. So there is actually a current conditions site that they post as well to avoid that, exactly what you just said.
Great. All right. Was there anything else on your report? Done? Okay. No other questions for Lisa Marie? All right. We'll go to public comment. Emma?
No public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
No public comment in Eureka.
None in Phoenix.
All right, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Lisa Marie Wyndham Myers to introduce our next agenda item, which is about social science integration.
Okay. This social science item is one we've been looking forward to. So Morgan Chow, Hollis Jones, and Chair Posey are coming to the dais right now. They were going to present on the council's social science updates. Tara is our new social science extension specialist, and she'll introduce herself and talk about her research priorities. Thank you for being here.
Okay, good morning. Chair Lee and council members, I'm excited to be here with Dr. Jones and Dr. Posey to share an update on council staff social science integration efforts. I'm going to start with the big picture of the what, the why, and the how of social science in the Delta, and I'll pass it to Dr. Jones to share our progress over the last 5 years, and then we'll close with Dr. Posey, who will share about her work herself and how she's going to build on our progress. And just to start, that we're really here today because we know that social science in the Delta has been dominated by a lot of the natural and physical sciences like water flows, contaminants, at-risk species, a lot of the things we covered this morning, and that there is a dearth of social sciences. And really, without the social sciences, we can't really fully understand our Delta community or fulfill our mission to further the state's co-equal goals, which include protecting the Delta as an evolving place, and that includes the cultural, recreational, natural resource, and agricultural values of the people of the Delta. So as staff, we've really been championing the integration of social sciences in our work over the last several years, and we're very excited to share with you today. Okay, so first is the what. So social sciences is really a wide range of disciplines, including professions such as economists, geographers, political scientists, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, and others. And all of these professions really vary in their research methods, their data types, and their analyses. People with a social science background work across sectors of the workforce in education, healthcare, law, government, business, technology, etc., and really can impact and influence natural resource management in a diverse amount of ways. And really, ultimately, social scientists all share the common aim of understanding people as individuals, communities, and societies, and how they interact with their environment. On to the why. Humans are just as an important part of our natural world as any other parts, and we need to understand really how they fit into it. Overlooking this dimension gives us an incomplete understanding of our biophysical world. We talked already this morning a lot about how people have both impacted the biophysical world through things like the Swamp Act, and also how people are impacted, like through HABs or harmful algal blooms. A few other examples of why we need social science in our work. So if you think about Sassoon Marsh and managing understanding invasive species, we really would have an incomplete and unsuccessful approach without understanding the attitudes, behaviors, and perceptions of the people that are managing the marsh themselves. So things like questions like, do people have access for the various tools needed for species removal? Are they willing to apply treatments preventatively? How much do various solutions cost? What are people willing to pay? Another example, we talked about Lookout Slough this morning. If you remember, a big part of that project was really understanding the current recreational use on the site, and that was really critical to the project's success. And that understanding required social science through recreational use surveys. And then one more example, our Delta DAPS vulnerability assessment really wouldn't have been what it was, or it would have been incomplete without the economic analyses that showed us the monetary value of the Delta's assets that are at risk from various climate hazards. So just overall, we really can't assume that if people have information, they will act on it. We know that you really need a deeper understanding of community values to influence behavior or get buy-in for solutions. And social scientists really are the specialists in understanding these dimensions. So next, a little bit more, why do we need social science in the Delta? We've touched on it a little bit this morning, but in the Delta, like many other places, people are a central part of the system. People deeply impact and are impacted by their surroundings. And furthering our understanding of behaviors, trends, governance, equity implications allows us to really craft solutions that better balance both the community and the ecological needs, and will allow us to have more sustained and a significant impact to further the state's co-equal goals. So lastly, the how. How we got here, really, in 2017, our Delta Independent Science Board published a review that described social science in the Delta as sparse and sporadic. And in response to that report, the Delta Science Program partnered with the UC Davis Coastal and Marine Sciences Institute and convened a task force to assess the state of social sciences in the Delta. And that 2020 report found the following at a high level, that there is really a lack of social science capacity and investment in the Delta. 2, that research activities are ongoing, but there's no long-term vision for how to integrate social sciences with other sciences. And 3, that adaptive management really isn't informed enough by the social sciences. So these findings really do highlight that social sciences have not been a priority for the Delta research and management. But as we covered on the earlier slides, it really needs to be to fulfill our mission. So with that, I will pass it now to Dr. Jones to provide a more in-depth look at our progress over the last 5 years. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Morgan. All right. So 5 years later, we can look back at some of the progress that has been made to address those findings that were just highlighted, as well as work that is still left to be done. The first step to integrating more social science into Delta science, management, and decision-making was to build capacity. And critical to that was the social science extension specialist. The council contracts with California Sea Grant to conduct specialized research and outreach on the human dimensions of water and environmental management and policy in the Delta. And so the first social science specialist was Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who started in 2020. And the new social science specialist is Dr. Tara Posey, whose PhD work directly informed the Delta Adapts Adaptation Plan and is here today to share with us more about her role. Next, in capacity building, we have the Bay Delta Social Science Community of Practice. And so this is a community of social science scholars, practitioners, and interested parties who are committed to advancing applicable and relevant research on the human dimensions of the Bay and Delta. And then we have the Social Science Integration Team, or the SIT. And so this is a group working across the council to identify opportunities for and support the integration of social science approaches in the agency's activities. And so the formation of the Social Science Integration Team has also been fostered by the hiring of more internal staff with social science expertise. These efforts to build capacity, internal and external to the Delta Stewardship Council, have laid some of the groundwork for a stronger social science presence in the Delta. Okay, so in addition to building internal and external capacity, some progress that has been made within the Delta Stewardship Council includes the addition of social science criteria in research funding solicitations. And so this, such as the Delta Research Awards and the Delta Science Fellowship. And so now they explicitly encourage research on the Delta as a social ecological system. Next, the council has adopted both the Tribal and Environmental Justice in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Issue Paper, or the TEJ paper, and the Delta Adapts Adaptation Plan, or Delta Adapts. And so both of these were shaped by social science methods, including surveys, interviews, and focus groups with community-based and tribally serving organizations, and marked important steps towards integrating tribal and environmental justice perspective into the council's work. And Dr. Jessica Rudnick, the former social science specialist, was integral to performing this work. I also want to highlight again that the draft of the 2026 Delta Science Plan is now out for public comment, and it includes 3 draft actions related to social science, addressing how funding, understanding, and management decisions in the Delta are informed by social science. It also includes the addition of a resource entitled Making Science Whole, embedding social science into natural science workflows. And so this resource was developed by council staff and helps demystify the myths of social science and equip natural scientists with practical entry points for working with social scientists and social science data. All right. Another important social science effort that I want to highlight today was the first ever Delta resident survey in 2023. Led by former social science specialist, Dr. Jessica Rudnick, the Delta Resident Survey was collected representative data on social and environmental well-being from over 2,200 households in the Delta and adjacent areas in Sacramento and Stockton. This survey allowed us to learn who people trust, where they get their information from, and has provided the foundation for new ways of doing outreach and forming partnerships. For example, the survey revealed disparities across access to resources such as flood insurance, which will require targeted policy to close the gap. Another example is climate risk perception. And so the map on this slide shows people's overall level of climate concern. And so with the lighter colors indicating higher levels of concern and the darker colors indicating lower levels of concern. And so by understanding that the Delta is not a homogeneous community, and we can tailor climate change adaptation policies and outreach for the best chances of success. And so all of this data is publicly available, and this QR code can take you to a Shiny app where you can explore this data further. This survey represents a significant advancement in understanding the social science landscape of the Delta and is intended to be repeated over time to track the well-being of an evolving population. Okay, so this presentation has highlighted additions to our capacity, investments in research, and long-term visioning. There's a lot of work going on that I just didn't have time to cover here, both internal to the Delta Stewardship Council and externally. And social science and the Delta has come a long way in the past 5 years, but the work is far from finished. So humans are a central part of the Delta system, and by continuing to support the social sciences, researchers and agencies can better navigate complex social ecological challenges, foster trust with communities, and ultimately produce more equitable, actionable, and durable outcomes for Californians. Next, I'll pass it off to Dr. Tara Posey to share more about her role as the new social science extension specialist.
All right, thank you, Morgan and Hollis, for introducing me and for covering social science in the Delta over the last few years. Oh, yeah. Speak the mic to you. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So as mentioned earlier, there are many types of social scientists, economists, political scientists, sociologists that use a wide range of methods, data types, and analyses. So what kind of social scientist am I? I am an applied environmental social scientist because I have an interdisciplinary background in social ecological systems science. And I consider myself applied because I'm focused on integrating my research into natural resource management and policy decisions. For instance, my past research in the Delta found the importance of collaborative forums for learning and forming partnerships, and the findings of which I've shared with the council in previous meetings and other relevant groups. I use both quantitative methods like statistical models and social network analysis, as well as qualitative approaches like thematic analyses of interview data. I also take a public scholarship approach to my work, meaning I aim to work with communities and agencies in shaping research questions, interpreting the data, and sharing that information back with them. For example, I analyze interview data from members of the Collaborative Science and Adaptive Management Program, or CSAMP, to look at the monitoring management disconnect, which was a priority science need for the Delta Science Program. During this process, I regularly attended the CAMPT, or Collaborative Adaptive Management Team meetings, and collaborated with leadership on the analysis of the data to ensure accuracy of it, which highlights my second area of work on policy engagement. I learned this approach during my academic training as well as through my 2022 Delta Science Fellowship, thanks in large part to how the fellowship was structured and also because of my really engaged community mentor during that process. Lastly, I do outreach and education. So this includes teaching, mentoring, giving talks and workshops, and then creating easy to understand materials like reports and research briefs. So for example, there's an image here on the slide of an info sheet I put together about governance for the 2023 Adaptive Management Forum. My research approach fits in well with the purpose and responsibilities of the Social Science Extension Specialist role, which exists to improve the understanding about the human dimensions of natural resource management, as well as support the application of social sciences into decision-making in the Delta. So my role aims to build on the existing social science foundation that Morgan and Hollis have set up for you all by doing a few different things. So one, conducting new research on priority topics identified from previous council initiatives. Two, participating in social science related groups in meetings to connect social science with ongoing decision-making. And lastly, facilitating collaboration and serving as an academic mentor. Additionally, this role is affiliated with UC Davis's Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior, so that I'm rooted in a research community and have access to university resources. So over the next 3 years, my research and extension program will focus on 3 priorities: adaptation, governance, and strategies, social well-being and resilience, and social science capacity. My first priority is improving how adaptation is governed. Governance challenges, such as limited funding and competing visions of the future, often pose the biggest barriers to making adaptation progress. So how can we deal with this? The first step is really mapping the governance network by identifying who's involved, how are they working together, and what do they care about. This network plot in the background of the slide is the network of organizations that are working together on adaptation in the Delta. So you can see it is quite large. So moving forward, some of my research priorities in this area include continued investigation into collaboration and learning between organizations, such as what factors lead to policy agreement and how can collaboration be improved in different land uses and sectors in the Delta. Additionally, a newer research area for me will look at trade-offs and opportunities of high priority climate adaptation strategies, such as climate smart farming and reduced reliance on Delta water. I also will participate in upcoming groups like the Delta Adaptation Working Group. The second priority is supporting social well-being and resilience of Delta communities. We know from previous studies, tracking social well-being over time provides data that can be integrated and used to enhance the effectiveness and equitability of natural resource management. Some key areas of work here include conducting a second Delta resident survey in 2027 and developing a long-term plan to capture changes over time in social well-being. Lastly, I will provide external expertise to the Council's efforts on developing social indicators. My third priority aims to build social science capacity. So previous research finds that embedding social scientists into natural resource planning helps bridge that science to policy divide, and it supports co-learning and confidence in the value of social science for improving environmental outcomes. I will help increase social science capacity in the Delta by participating in the social science integration team and co-chairing the Bay Delta Social Science Community of Practice. I will also be teaching water policy at UC Davis this spring, mentoring undergraduate students and fellows, and collaborating with researchers and managers from other organizations across both the Bay and Delta, which are all efforts that help contribute towards building up a workforce with social science expertise. Lastly, I would like to lead a project that assesses the value and impact of social science research in supporting the Delta's co-equal goals. This would include measuring the extent of social science outputs in use in the Delta, such as number of disciplines, methods, and policies influenced. So with that, I would like to conclude with my program goals. By the end of this 3-year time period, I aim to see reduced barriers to adaptation and a better understanding of the drivers of good governance, and overall improved regional collaboration and coordination. A second round of social well-being data and a plan for long-term monitoring. And lastly, a stronger belief in the understanding and value of social science for supporting the Delta's co-equal goals, as well as a stronger, more diverse and connected community of social scientists. So, thank you. And now we can move on to any questions you all may have.
All right, any questions for Dr. Posey?
At page 15, when you have social well-being, the one with 3 circles, adaptation, governance, and strategies is clear. Social well-being and resilience, social science capacity. I just wanted to know what is can you explain what is social science capacity and social well-being and resilience? The social well-being and resilience is clear, but I was not clear on social science capacity.
Yeah, so social science capacity is one of my main objectives in this role. So I hope to increase the amount of expertise that folks here at the council and in other relevant groups associated with my work in the Delta, how well they can understand social science and then use that to improve their own objectives in their work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dan Zingali's got his hand up. Just saw that. So go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Posey. I'm really grateful that you've decided to dedicate yourself to help break down some of the barriers between science and policy, between science and public understanding. I'm particularly interested in your priority for around the social well-being and resilience. And it doesn't have to be now, but now or in the future, I'd be really interested in hearing a little more detail about your thoughts about the survey, the next survey. You said maybe in 2027. I think it's terrific that you're making that a priority, and I'll be interested in where you go with it.
That's great to hear. I definitely am open to hearing any thoughts you have and then sharing information I have in my plan for it.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Burgess.
This is the kind of stuff I love to hear. Often we have to understand why we're trying to do things and what is motivating. And when we're talking about the Delta, sometimes it's about efficiencies of getting water through or balancing harmful algae blooms, and that's the biological and physical sciences. But then there's a reason why we need to do it. It could be economic, it could be well-being, it could be better management of different things. And for the longest time, it seemed like science was kind of fought through. But the social sciences weren't necessarily included in that. And as I was reading, I was thinking about the metrics of how do we measure the impacts of the social circumstances of things that we do. Similar to like what we talked about during the gold rush, there was reasons why something was dammed, but we didn't really recognize the impacts that it had on our tribes or the water quality and so we can measure how much flow is happening, but can we measure how it impacts someone's life? We can go on the economic, but can we? It's like, so I'm hoping that there will come a day that with the social sciences, we will be able to create those metrics. We will be able to create those expectations of mitigation for this versus that. And I think that there has to be a respect between all of the sciences on these things if we're going to really truly have co-equal goals. And so I appreciate this. The other thing I'll say is, when was this survey brought out? Was it last year? Time is always weird to me. Was it last?
I believe it was 2023.
Oh, it was that long ago. Okay. I felt, and I was new to this committee, I felt like the Stewardship Council the members didn't receive it as much as I hope they would have. And so I'm hoping that we will develop more open minds to the various sciences. It's easy to measure how much flow or what temperature, but can we measure and appreciate the impacts that these different things can have? And so I like the work that you're doing. And as a person that does work in government and all that, I want to model how to help make that happen too. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, again, welcome aboard. We're thrilled to have you here. I know that the tribal and environmental justice paper and the Delta Adapts that you highlighted are both documents that we've spent years, and the survey was sort of part of the basis for some of the tribal and environmental justice paper. I know Councilmember Zingali was very interested in that and took a look at drafts and was very helpful with the input on that as well. And I was so with all the work that we've been doing around this the last few years, and now it's finally becoming a little bit more public. That feels really great, I think, for everybody. And I was thrilled to see how much social science was really incorporated into the State of the Estuary Conference. Like, it's becoming maybe not becoming isn't the right word, but it's expected now that that would be a part of our conversations going forward, and I love that. And I'm also proud that we have 2 social scientists on the ISB as well. So I think, we're doing a well-rounded job of incorporating social science in, and really look forward to your input, and your priorities and goals look fantastic. So thank you very much for that. Any other comments from members? No? All right, then we'll go to public comment on this item.
There is no public comment in Sacramento, Madam Chair.
None in Eureka.
All right, and I'll note that Vice Chair Miller had to drop off, so we don't have our don't have her on for the rest of the meeting. Our final agenda item is the research impact assessment of Delta Science Program funded research. So we'll welcome up Ash Zemenik, our senior environmental scientist, and Rachel Kloppenstein, an environmental program manager.
Friendly reminder to silence all mics not in use. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, council members. While we get the slides queued up, I'll give a brief introduction, and then I'm going to quickly pass the mic. My name is Rachel Klopfenstein. I'm a program manager for our collaborative science and peer review unit here in the Delta Science program. As our name suggests, we have been working on strengthening collaborative science efforts, and have recently been focusing on how our current initiatives, how we can learn from our current initiatives to adapt our efforts and help to strengthen the work that the agency does. Specifically, in this presentation, you'll hear how we're asking how DSP-funded research is impacting management decision-making in the Delta, which is a really critical part of the science program's mission, and one of our goals in identifying and funding management-relevant science and research gaps that are listed in our science action agenda, which you heard a little bit about at the August council meeting. So Councilmember Burgess's comments just recently were a good primer for this presentation. Like, you threw out words like metrics and impact. So this is great. But I'm now going to introduce our senior environmental scientist, Ash Zemenik, who's been working on this research impact assessment project since they joined the council in 2024. Ash has done an amazing job at making this assessment a reality and producing data for this project for the very first time. So Ash is going to explain what research impact assessment is, why we're using this framework to evaluate the impact of our work and the research that we fund, what we've learned so far through a pilot effort, and where we plan to go from here. So please, Ash, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, council members, for having me here today to present on this effort to assess the impact of Delta Science Program funded research. Just to put this all in context, I'd like to remind everyone that the Delta Science Program, or DSP's, mission is to provide the best possible unbiased scientific information for water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. And among the science program's core functions is to fund research in the Delta, and we do this through various mechanisms, including the Delta Research Awards, Delta Science Fellows, and directed actions. The research we fund tackles all elements of the landscape, and we use the science action agenda to identify key management relevant science gaps that guide this research funding. So why should we identify the impact of DSP funded research? While the DSP is an important player when it comes to funding science in the Delta, we are the 3rd largest funding agency for Delta science, averaging around $8 million per year in the last few funding years. Importantly, DSP funding is a reliable source of funding for targeted research and synthesis. And you can see that in the orange on the graph on the right. And this is in contrast to other top funders that typically focus on monitoring that is required by certain permits to track listed species of fish and water quality. So the role of the DSP, as stipulated in the Delta Reform Act, is to contribute to funding research and synthesis. And although we know Delta scientists count on this funding for synthesis and research, we have not yet comprehensively documented the impact of this funding. So therefore, the goal of this pilot effort, let's see if we can get that up here, is to measure or identify the science and management impacts of DSP-funded research. We want to do this because we want to document and demonstrate the utility of our past funded research and ensure we're using public funds as efficiently and effectively as possible. From this, we can also adapt future funding solicitations to maximize societal and management impacts. And through this effort, we also hope to build a stronger case for continued and increased funding in the future. So these motivations for documenting research impact led us to ask the question of how can we actually measure impact? So research impacts on policy and management are notoriously difficult to track, as they're often nonlinear and occur over long time scales. And what I mean by this is that management decisions are often based on multiple lines of research evidence that can date back for decades. So we reviewed multiple approaches to measure research impact, and often funding agencies and organizations will track dollars spent or dollars out the door on research. Another common approach is to attempt to measure the financial returns or return on investment, or ROI, of the research. But we weren't satisfied with these approaches to understand the impact of DSP-funded research because the relationship between dollars spent and impact is not always linear. And the scope of our mission is not about return on investment. It's more about having a genuine contribution to management and decision-making in the Delta. So in our research, we discovered an emerging method to measure management impacts of research called Research Impact Assessment, or RIA. And although it's gaining traction in academic literature and funding agencies, there's no one prescriptive method to measure research impact. But one commonly accepted approach is to use an impact model that breaks down the impact process and is specific to our programmatic goals. So next, I'm going to walk you through our impact model so you can get a better idea of our approach. So our impact model starts with identifying inputs or the resources utilized to implement DSP-funded science. So our inputs include creating funding solicitations, which is made possible by funds for research and staff time. And again, all of our funded research addresses science actions in the science action agenda. So the next stage of our impact model identifies activities, which are actions of the funding program. And here, scientists are utilizing our funding to produce best available science. Next, we have outputs, and these are direct results from the funded research projects, such as publications, reports, and presentations. These outputs convey best available science to diverse audiences in the Delta and beyond. And emergent research questions and knowledge gaps identified by these outputs can also influence future iterations of the science action agenda. So next to arise are outcomes, or community level awareness of our program activities. So this is when policymakers and decision makers become aware of and understand the best available science that has been produced by this DSP funding. And then this leads to our ultimate impacts, whereby the best available science informs decision-making in the Delta. Again, I just want to point out that this process isn't always linear. There can be emergent research and management questions that might inform future science and funding priorities, which might in turn influence impact in the future. But in general, this impact model was really helpful in identifying the process by which DSP-funded science can be translated to impact in the Delta. And with this model, we can assess metrics at each stage of the model to infer whether funded research is making progress towards impact. So we utilize this RIA impact model to spearhead a pilot effort to measure DSP research impact. We focused our effort on the 2018 Delta Research Awards and the 2020 Delta Science Fellows. And we chose these projects given that it typically takes up to 9 years for management and policy impacts of research to become apparent. And although we are aware of other impacts of our directed actions and other funding solicitations, this pilot effort marks our first and most intensive effort to date to assess the impacts of DSP-funded research. And we plan to continue this effort into the future and update our methods as we learn better ways to track and measure impact. Okay, so the next step after identifying our impact model and our target solicitations was to collect the impacts data. So we did this by surveying our funded scientists, and we collected data on research outputs like published papers, conference presentations, and media coverage. We asked about outcomes such as community engagement and communication with other interested parties. And we also looked at ultimate impacts like management and policy changes that happened because of this funded science. So next, we gathered data on the peer-reviewed publications produced by these science projects, and we looked at how many times they were cited and how many times they've been accessed or viewed online. And then finally, we searched relevant management documents for citations of these published papers. So these documents included biological opinions, science plans for big efforts in the Delta, and adaptive management plans of our covered actions. So this has been a really big and exciting effort. And before I dig into the numbers, I just want to remind you all this is essentially our first comprehensive look at research impact. I'm going to present data on 22 of the 25 funded projects based on survey response rate. I'm going to present results by impact model stage, so starting with inputs and ending with ultimate impacts. And then I will go in and highlight more details on one of our projects that had management impacts in the Delta. So we'll start by looking at the preliminary results of inputs or resources utilized for these funded projects. Our funded projects utilized $8.6 million from the DSP, and the funded projects had to address one of the 25 science actions in the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda. In addition to the $8.6 million from the DSP, we also had additional funding from 2 partners. And we've also been working to assess other inputs metrics. So for example, we've been internally tracking staff hours devoted to contract creation and management to try to get an idea of how much staffing needs we have and the workload associated with this funding. Okay, so the next stage of the impact model is activities. So this funding resulted in 22 research projects led by 46 scientists representing 6 multi-institution collaborations. Of the projects, 16 were targeted foundational research projects and 6 were synthesis projects. And project topics were really variable. They included tidal wetland restoration, satellite remote sensing, salmon migration and genomics, pesticide toxicity to fish, climate change and greenhouse gases, invasive species in the Delta, and more. Okay, so next we can look at the outputs or the direct products of the projects. So the 22 funded projects have so far produced 68 conference presentations, 44 peer-reviewed publications, 13 published data sets, 9 reports, 3 story maps, 2 book chapters, and 1 dissertation. And it's really exciting to see that some of these projects have been featured in the media, including by 17 blog posts, 6 press releases, and 2 podcasts or interviews. And what's really exciting, even though a lot of these peer-reviewed publications have come out really recently, they have already been cited by other peer-reviewed publications over 500 times. They've been viewed or accessed online over 88,000 times, and they've been downloaded over 6,200 times. Okay, so I just went over the outputs of the funded projects, like the published articles, but now I'm going to talk about outcomes, which are really getting at the community level awareness of these projects. So for example, did the scientists engage with the community during their project, or did they meet with other agencies or nonprofits to discuss their project? So in terms of community engagement, the scientists reported that 5 projects informed the community about their work, 5 projects consulted with the community, 2 projects involved the community, and 7 projects actively collaborated with the community on their projects. So that was really exciting to see. We also found that the primary investigators of the funded projects communicated with various agencies and organizations about their work. So we found that 11 projects communicated with federal government agencies, 13 with state government agencies, 4 with the local government, 10 with NGOs, and 2 with community-based organizations or CBOs. So it was really exciting to learn that so many projects were working with and communicating with various interested parties about their work. Okay, and this brings us to the final and perhaps most exciting stage of our impact model, where we worked to document the impacts or system level changes from our funded science projects. So from our survey and follow-up work scouring management documents, we were able to find that this cohort of DSP funded research did indeed have demonstrable impacts on management in the Delta. So far we have found that one project informed tidal wetland hypotheses in the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes Science Plan. One project's model is now informing the Air Resources Board to track greenhouse gas emissions and fluxes in wetlands in California. And then 2 projects were cited in the 2 different 2024 biological opinions. So one informed biology of Delta smelt and the other informed biology of salmon. And then finally, one project informed NOAA's Green Sturgeon Recovery 5-year update. So it's important to note that these direct examples of research impact may not be the only impacts of this funded research. So we're continuing to investigate management and also legislation, and we're communicating with these scientists to track their outputs, as again, some scientists are still working to publish their work. So next, I'd just like to zoom in on one of these projects to give you a better idea of what this impact can look like. So just to give some context, the California Air Resources Board is currently working on their natural and working lands carbon inventory. This estimates carbon stocks across California ecosystems, and it's a really important tool to inform how California's land base contributes to the state's climate goals, such as carbon neutrality by 2045. So in its 2025 update, the Air Resources Board has identified methods to inventory carbon and greenhouse gas fluxes in California's various ecosystems, including wetlands. And critical to this update is the groundbreaking model called Peppermint, developed by Dr. Patty Oikawa and colleagues that predicts greenhouse gas fluxes in tidal wetlands. And I just want to note those colleagues include 2020 Delta Science Fellow Julie Shahan, 2022 Delta Science Fellow Maya Matsumara, and the Delta Lead Scientist, Dr. Lisa Marie Wyndham-Myers. And the Air Resources Control Board learned about this model through a report by the California Ocean Protection Council. A final note on this is that Dr. Oikawa indicated that the Delta Research Award was really helpful, and it was incredible to get all of this work started. Oh, okay. Well, I can just read the final takeaways. So first, we found that the funded scientists are producing rigorous, actionable science. We found that the funded research is already influencing Delta management, and it should continue to, again, as a lot of these scientists are still continuing to publish on their work. We're excited about RIA, or Research Impact Assessment, as a new tool to measure research impact of Delta-funded research, and we're excited to continue to hone how we track and measure research impact. And last, we are excited to continue this effort in the coming years. Since the 2018 Delta Research Awards, which we just presented on, we have made some updates to our funding solicitations. For example, we're encouraging more partnerships with the community members and also research managers. And so with continued RIA, we'll be able to figure out if those changes lead to different impacts in the system, and we'll be able to update future solicitations to reflect that impact. So with that, I just want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you can see that this pilot effort is really exciting, and I would love to hear your thoughts and questions if you have any. So thank you.
Thanks. That was great. Does anyone have any questions so far? Oh, Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. This is outstanding. Thank you very much. I particularly appreciate the specific numbers on the community engagement and collaboration around the research. And I'm wondering are there any specific examples where that element, community co-design, altered or improved the direction of the research?
That's a really good question, and we are really interested in digging further into the details of the community engagement. So far, we've focused on looking at the management impacts and following up with how those management impacts happen, and we haven't dug too much into the community involvement, so I think that's a good next step for us to do.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Look forward to it.
I might just add, Ash mentioned we can use this process to inform our future solicitations. And we actually had more requirements for community engagement in some of the solicitations we've done since this 2019 one. And so we might have some data to compare to once we get to analyzing the next Delta Research Award, for example. So maybe some comparison can be done. This is like baseline data.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Member Patterson and then Member Moranian.
Just want to thank you for the presentation. It was really exciting, and really love the work and the goal to actually be able to track the impact of the work. It must be exciting also for the scientists and those involved to see how impactful the work is that everyone is doing. I had a question because this is a pilot. What are you thinking are your ways, and can you talk a little bit about how you plan to scale this into a broader evaluation of impact of the science and the funding that the council puts out?
Definitely, yeah, great question, and thank you so much. I think we're going to continue to repeat this effort. So we had that survey we sent to scientists, and we've been doing follow-up interviews with them. So that's kind of providing a template for how we can move forward in the future. Perhaps use the same survey and maybe update it based on the questions we get from this effort. Yeah, Rachel, do you have anything to add?
No, I think it's a great question, though, and we could probably put some more thought. I think we had nearly 45 metrics that we were looking at this time around. And so part of scaling it might be scaling back and seeing which metrics are most valuable. So lots to think about, but it is very exciting to have this first bit of data to play with.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting work that you've done, and thank you. And I always think about it of where does our research go? My question is, when you are qualifying, what kind of measuring stick are you using generally to develop the criteria against which you say, yes, this was effective or not? If there's a methodology of doing that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Like Rachel said, we came up with a lot of different metrics, and we got those from looking at the literature and also other impact reports published by SFEI and UC Davis and things like that. Sorry, can you repeat your question?
In a way, like you're saying, 100 people looked into this, 3 people made a presentation off of it. What number is enough for you to say this was a good study?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's debate on how impactful published papers are, but we're showing that a lot of our published papers are showing up in management documents. So I think that's actually a really useful one to have. I don't know if there's actual benchmarks for like each project should come out with like 2 publications or 3, and whether or not more publications necessarily results in more impact. For example, some of our scientists produced like 10 papers and others produced only 1, but that 1 paper was cited in the biological opinions. So I'm not sure if it's like a specific number, just the fact that it gets out there and it gets communicated.
Yeah, and I didn't mean number, but specific events that assures you that this was good. And it could be that you say the answer might be yes, because it ended up in management reports. It ended up in a very significant report, a conference. But I'm just trying to feel of what not really the criteria, but the measuring sticks will be. And I think this is a pilot. And when you scale it, as we discussed, maybe it's going to be easier to know the answers.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you.
Member Burgess.
So I saw this coming and I was really excited. The thing with government and doing what we do, there is a level of trust that we need to earn and maintain. And that's not only in what the work product is, but it's how responsible we are being with what we're doing. And so I love that the curiosity to be willing to put out this information to everyone, those that we're serving, those that are helping fund, all of that. It helps establish that trust. And then going into why these studies are being done. Again, going back to the trust, some folks are doing research to prove something or disprove something. Others are just curious, or they're trying to collect, baseline data so that we can understand the whole better, or parts. And so, again, for when there is a conflict of decisions or opinions, by showing what we're doing creates more trust, and that gets out of the equation of how that conversation goes. I imagine that some of the outcomes are not as we expected or are even negative, and that is okay too, because that's part of science. And so I think or it reveals additional things that we need to consider in those works. So that has value too. So that's one of the metrics that you could also include. And lastly, all of these things that were funded possibly had specific time constraints, which probably moves things along and affects the outcomes and all of that. So I would imagine that, there, some of these things that have been cited are going to be cited for a long, long time, or may kind of sit on a shelf for a while and then become really important down the road. So I'm glad you're doing these measurements, and you're creating this wheel. But I feel like the biggest thing is you're helping create trust and transparency.
Yeah, I was going to add, when we were talking about this presentation earlier, we talked about like the COVID vaccines and how did those come together so quickly? And it's like, well, it's because there were decades and decades of research on messenger RNA and on various coronaviruses that, it was like right time, right place, that scientists were then able to synthesize using, decades and decades of research. And so, hopefully we will continue to bear fruit from these awards for many, many years. And then also my recollection is the two research award solicitations that we're talking about were affected by COVID, right? So some of these faced a lot of delays. People couldn't access their labs, or if there was field work. In fact, we had to extend all these contracts. It was a lot of work. And so, I think we're going to continue to learn more about this crop of awards. And then obviously we have more to look at as well.
But it's, again, like to your point, it's what we've been able to measure right now. So
how often do you expect to come up to us with updates on this?
I think that'd be something we'd love to hear from you all. Ash is actually working this first batch. We're trying to think about maybe annually reporting just on this RIA effort in general, and can kind of cluster things by the solicitations we're talking about. But it's a pilot and this is the early phase. So any feedback you would all have would be great. And I think we'd be happy to bring our results to you as they come.
Yeah, I think you can see from the level of engagement, we're very interested in seeing, we hear a lot about the awards. Somebody comes and they tell us, oh, here's all the awards that are going out. And then 9 years later, none of the same people are on the council, right? And so we're seeing really the results of work that happened when our predecessors came and approved things like that. And I guess I had one more. I'll turn it over to you in just a sec, before I lose my train of thought. 9 years is a long cycle. Are there things that we're thinking about? We mentioned some of the delay here might have been due to COVID, and then obviously I'm learning a lot that science is a very rigorous peer-reviewed process, and patience is sort of built into that. I think when you get to an area where you're talking about policymakers and we're like, oh, we want the best science available now so that we can make decisions as quickly as we can. Are there things you're thinking about in terms of technologies or other ways to get through that 9-year life cycle a little faster?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we were talking about this a little bit the other day, where we're kind of unsure if we could speed up science necessarily, but I think we can speed up the process of communicating science to decision makers. Some of our impacts arose through like the interagency ecological program. So I think 2 projects had connections through that got the word out. Some was even before the science was published through that, and then other impacts necessarily waited for the published articles to come out and have that impact. And sometimes those spoke for themselves and were just noticed, and other times there was connections to kind of promote the paper to decision makers. So I think we can definitely work on that. And we do do our Delta Research Awards seminar series, which I think is great outreach, but I think we can probably increase our capacity on that.
Great. Yes, Diane.
Yeah, I was going to say, I expect that financial constraints are going to be really influencing the amount of science that's going to be coming down the road. And I think by doing these kind of things, we can show how credible of a recipient we are. The only other thing I was going to say is I was wondering if there was some sort of AI model to build into this where you could plug in things and it could do those types of analysis. Not that I'm a big AI person. I'm actually not, but if you could just do some sort of metrics, it could do something for you.
Yeah, I think we could look at instead of manually going through all these management documents, we could let them read by AI and see if any of the names are spitting out. And yeah, look at other publication metrics. Might be easier to not do it manually.
The ISB used AI to create a synthesis document prior to their climate summit symposium. And it was interesting the way that they talked about and described it. And there was a really robust conversation at the ISB about even using it. But they kept it to a closed database of just the documents that they wanted to feed into the AI. And then it kind of did a summary so that people going to the conference would have an idea of, oh, here's all of the information that's being looked at the conference, and synthesized it, as you said. So yeah, the state is going through quite robust changes with figuring out how and what the proper policies are and incorporating AI into what we do. And the public piece of it, how much is garbage out there and different things like that. So definitely the council I know that there's an effort within the council to look at that. I had one other quick question. I noticed that on slide 32, we've got some science expenditures for 2022-23. The Delta Science Program is like a slice of the pie. Can you talk about a little bit of where the other funding is coming from? I'm just curious who else is sort of, doing some of this. I have some ideas of who's doing it, but I just wondered if you could share it.
Sure, yeah, that's from the data from the 2024 crosscut budget report. And I think the top two funders are DWR and Reclamation, and then there's a handful of other funders. So we're number 3, and then there's a handful of other funders as well.
But most of that funding is required monitoring or mitigation from operations of the State Water Project, for example. So what's really unique about the small amount of funding that we have is the flexibility that we have to really identify what the needs are in the system and then design the criteria accordingly.
Correct. Got it.
Yeah, and I think we don't need to pull up that bar graph, but we were a tiny slice of the monitoring, but a larger contribution is from us is for targeted foundational research and other research and synthesis. And just to Jessica's point too, we use our framework with the science action agenda to look at gaps in science and prioritize that with the community. And then that's a lot of our research that we're funding. So we have flexibility where we can be updating those priorities on a shorter time scale and hopefully having more of an impact. We're to the point about finances being limited. I think we're trying to squeeze every last drop of impact out of the 8 or so million that we have in the funding contributions.
Right. Got it. Awesome. All right. Great presentation. Any other members have any other comments? Nothing. Oh, yes, sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Diane, you triggered something for me. You talked about that, accelerating the pace and that really the science is going to take the time that the science is going to take, but it's a question of can we get this into the hands of policymakers and community more quickly? And I think that issue of how in academia is something that's a live question right now in a lot of places. How do we actually make sure the people who need this information can get it and maybe in a way that is approachable for them? And I was thinking about our prior presentation with our social science integration and the opportunity to work together to make sure to use social science to figure out how we get this science into the hands of community and into the hands of policymakers. So hoping there's an opportunity for collaboration there.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you.
All right, Emma, do we have any public comment on this item?
No public comment in Sacramento.
Daniel? See, did he get kicked off?
Here he comes.
Okay.
Councilmember Zingali, do you have any public comment at your location?
There is none here.
All right, no public comment.
Thank you. All right, and with that, I'll just briefly talk about preparation for our next council meeting, which will take place on Thursday, December 18th. And please refer to the posted meeting notice for further information or updates about that. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.